Today in our Operations and Supply Chain Management showcase, we have Dr. Robert Klassen, who is an Associate Dean of Research at Ivy Business School, with research at the intersection of operations, sustainability, and supply chain management. His work explores how management practices and organizational capabilities shape operational and sustainability performance, and has been published in leading journals such as Management Science, Journal of Operations Management, Academy of Management Journal, and Production and Operations Management. He serves as a consulting editor for the Journal of Operations Management, but he also was before a co-editor or editor-in-chief for other journals as well. Beyond his research, he teaches in MBA and Executive MBA programs, and recently launched a course on managing for sustainable development, reflecting his commitment to integrating sustainability into management education. He also developed more than 20 teaching cases, which I'm going to ask for free access by the end of this interview, in operations strategy, quality management, and environmental management. And when I asked him a fun fact, because I always ask for our guests a fun fact, Robert said that he spent a year at the Vlerick Business School in Belgium, and he highlighted the Belgian good food that they have there, which I'm not actually buying. I think he actually mentioned that he was there for maybe research sustainable practices in the traditional breweries, but maybe I will let you give your own perspective, but I'm not buying that story of Belgian food being good, sorry.
I don't know. I thought it worked out very well personally. So yes.
But let me ask, during the sabbatical year that you spent in the Vlerick School, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sorry for our Belgian audience, but how was it? What basically you did during your sabbatical?
So it was a great opportunity actually to start a new research stream looking at social issues in supply chain management. So as some in the audience might know, that field has developed quite robustly over the last 15 years or so. And what it really allowed me to do was talk to a number of Belgian firms that were really trying to advance practices along social lines. And in doing so, I conducted about 7 different case studies across different Belgian firms, and then explored exactly what they were doing to try to improve their practices, not only in their own operations, but backward in their supply chains as well.
And in terms of the entire experience, and not only the research part, how was spending a year? Because you are originally American, right?
Canadian, actually born Canadian.
And so you were born and raised in Canada. You still work in Canada?
Yes, I do. Yes. So it was interesting. As you might be aware, the culture obviously is a little different in Belgium. They speak 2 languages, Dutch as well as French, as their national languages, or Flemish, I should say, is the more correct term. And spending some time there, especially with my family, was extremely interesting. The children were in sort of middle school at that point in time, and so they were able to really get a different sense of culture. And as well, for my wife and I, it was a great time to see that part of Europe and get to know some great Belgian colleagues as well. So, and Vereke was one faculty member that I worked very closely with during that time there, and so certainly appreciated the opportunity to expand my cultural horizons, but also my research horizons as I spent time there. So I'd certainly recommend a sabbatical abroad for any faculty member who can do so, and it's definitely a great way to both see new things, but value what you have at your home institution too.
Going to this direction and thinking of things that people don't realize that they will actually get from the academic life, like this experience, what do you think that people usually don't consider? It can be both a good thing or a not so good thing from our career.
Yeah, so I think, the analogy that I'll draw is that faculty are usually sort of like independent contractors with guaranteed base salary. We have a home institution where we teach. We hopefully are able to conduct research in the direction and the area that we want. But really, it's the opportunity to be an entrepreneur that I think attracts a lot of us into this particular career path. You'll have an income, or at least a base level of income, but beyond that, you're really given quite a bit of freedom to explore different things, to work with different firms, to teach different audiences, whether it's through exec ed or other sorts of individual engagements. And that really is something that I'm sure I didn't fully appreciate when I started this career. And you see how different colleagues at my home institution here and at other places around the world have really leveraged that opportunity to make an impact on business practice, make an impact on students as they become future leaders. And so it's this broad degree of impact that I think we have that probably early on we underappreciate, but maybe as we get a little further in our careers, we start to understand a little bit better what the opportunities were and where sort of different ties have developed over time.
Um, a more personal question. If you don't want to answer this one, it will be fine. But was there any moment that you thought, I'm quitting the academia?
No, I can honestly say no, I haven't had that happen. I think if you can make it through your PhD program, that's a pretty good sign. Because then at least, you've made through I would argue, the minimum hurdle that you need to be most a faculty member. I think at that point, it's really around trying to understand the type of career that would work best for you. Is it working with particular student audiences? So do you favor undergrads, for example? Do you favor MBAs or other graduate students? Do you really want to dig deep into research, or do you want to do more administrative tasks, which, is partly what I'm doing now as Associate Dean of Research? And so all of those are possibilities, and really the idea is to keep as many options open as you go forward. And I've been fortunate to have that in terms of the people that I work with. I've worked with great research colleagues over the years. The institution that I'm at is also, very supportive in terms of trying to pursue different things. So, I'd have to say back to your original question that, is there a time when I didn't want to be an academic? I'd say no. I mean, at this point, I'm not sure I could do anything else, to be honest. So it does become kind of a self-reinforcing career in the sense that because you're given freedom, you tend to go in the directions that you favor over time, if that's possible. And assuming you're successful at that, then it kind of builds that virtuous cycle that allows you to continue to do more of that. Now, I recognize that some careers and some people's trajectory isn't always what they personally prefer. The market's not very strong right now for new academics moving into the space, and so I think there are some challenges there in terms of going forward. But you've had the training as a PhD scholar, and so now it's how do you best leverage the opportunities that are given to you as you kind of move forward.
So was during the PhD time that you had a sense of belonging to the academia? I will tell you that I asked the same question for other distinguished professors,
Sure.
and some of them just answer no. It was by the time I got my tenure. For you, how was it?
So I think the PhD is difficult. There's no way around it. You have to put a lot of time and effort. It becomes an obsession almost to get through. Otherwise, you won't get through. And it does partly depend on the faculty supervisors that you're able to work with. I had great faculty that I was able to work with at UNC. And trying to sort of think about, where do you go at that point forward? And I think it was interesting in my case because I had a number of thankfully different options that I could pick from when I graduated. But some of the schools were very research intensive. Some were more, middle of the road in terms of teaching and research, and some were very teaching intensive. And clearly, that's a decision that you have to kind of sort through at the time. But I think as a new PhD student, or sorry, new PhD graduate, it's very hard to understand which is actually going to work best for you. And so you decide, obviously, because you have to. But at that point, it's about trying to figure out over the next 3 to 5 years, well, what is it exactly that I want to do and I'm best at? And how can I kind of shift and mold my career in that direction over time? It won't happen instantly, but over time. I think in many cases, when you get tenure at any institution, they say, look, you're doing what we want you to do. By then, they hope it's a habit that you'll keep doing what got you tenure as you kind of move forward in your career. But sometimes faculty decide, no, that's not exactly what I want to keep doing. It was what I wanted to do to get tenure. But that gives you the opportunity to sort of say, well, no, I'd actually rather go, more in the research direction of that I didn't initially pursue, or I want to do more graduate teaching, and initially I only did undergraduate teaching, or something along those lines. And so I think tenure gives you the security that you can do those things. But at the same time, there's a bit of an implicit contract that the school gave you that said, look, this is what you did to do tenure. We might expect similar things to continue in the future too. So it's a bit of a two-way street there as you think about that process of getting tenure. But it's a milestone we all hope to achieve, of course, as we kind of begin our careers.
Okay, now moving to a more research-oriented question, and considering you are a distinguished scholar, how do you have a specific strategy to begin a research project or to pick who will be your partners in a project or so on, or one habit that changed your research productivity maybe?
So one of the big things that I found is very helpful is working with great doctoral students actually, because in large part, as you begin to develop your research, at least I'll just talk about personally, as I develop my research pathway, you see a range of questions and you try to explore those, and it might be with colleagues that you already know probably because you've worked with them on other papers, and so you continue working in the same kind of broad trajectory. But as new doctoral students have entered our program, and I've worked with a good number of outstanding students, they often have different questions, research questions. They often have different issues that kind of intrigue them or they're curious about. And so, on my part is being willing to listen and being open to hear what they have to say, and more importantly, try to encourage them to develop what they're thinking about. And that turns into really interesting papers often, and ultimately for them a dissertation. And as I think longer term, several broad research streams have kind of grown out some of those curious questions. And so for me, it's been about trying to work with great people, and I've had the fortune to do that. And so as we sort of think about how do we start new research projects, it's about probably trying to work with new people, whether it's through a doctoral program or whether it's through sabbaticals that you come in contact with new scholars, and so on. So I think there's lots of opportunities, but it really is about trying to be open to new ideas and new directions, and then people will sort of intrigue your interest, and ideally you can work with them to develop some of those papers as well. So and I would say that's continued through much of my career. Now I only have one doctoral student at this point. She's getting close to graduation. But as we sort of look down the road, it's again working with some junior scholars as well as established scholars on some research directions. But I'm not the source of all the ideas. I'll be pretty plain about that. It's really about listening and hearing and trying to kind of reinforce the ideas that emerge.
And well, let's consider that most of our audience will be of PhD students and early career faculty.
Okay.
So
Sure.
what do you think is the worst advice that PhD students still follow?
Nice. Okay, that one I'm gonna have to think about a little while. I would. So I think the challenge is really around developing your research identity. And so if it's about kind of reinforcing existing streams, I think there's less payoff likely from pursuing a well-established, well-trodden stream of research than trying to look at something novel and new. I know there's a lot of excitement about AI and how that is a field of research, not just to use it as a tool for research, but actually thinking about it from a research perspective. And to me, that's an example of, well, here's something new and different. We're not quite sure how to conduct research in this space, and that offers a lot of opportunity. I think another area that, honestly has a lot of promise that hasn't been heavily developed, maybe to the extent it should, is thinking about, much of the politicization of trade that's been occurring in recent years. We've developed our supply chains very much around, sort of thinking through how to optimize hyper efficiency in terms of thinking through the best way to structure supply chains, but that's no longer necessarily the only or the big factor at this point in time. And so trying to understand how this is reshaping from an operations perspective some of these challenges. And so I think, the worst advice I guess I could speculate sometimes students are given is, pick a topic that's well done and add a little bit more to it. I would actually say there's much more excitement about trying to pick a new topic or an emerging topic or a poorly understood topic that really promises a much longer life in terms of your research development. Because you'd like to stick with the same topic through at least the first 10 years of your career. And of course, there's, subtopics and a whole range of other things, but trying to sort of double down on what is really new and novel and interesting really attracts attention. But that's messy. It's messy to do things like that. And it's not always clear how what the best methods are in terms of trying to work through some of that.
Just also to clarify, because I think also considering I'm not a PhD student anymore, but 2 years ago I was, and I think that people struggle when they think about novelty, and sometimes they just go through a research avenue that it will turn into nothing in the end. So how to identify that you are in the good novel research avenue and not in the bad one, like this won't turn out
Yeah, no,
into.
that's a very, very key question. And so normally, the thing we talk about is a little bit of diversification is not a bad thing. And so, thinking of a couple of streams that you might pursue over the short term and see whether they grow and develop into more interesting topics. I do think being connected with, if you're earlier in your career, being connected with a senior scholar or two or three also may help in terms of sort of market testing the novelty of your ideas to see whether, in fact, they do have a longer lifespan as you sort of develop. Um, there's probably no guaranteed way. It's coming back to my original statement about being an entrepreneur as an academic. One of the ways we're also entrepreneurs is how we think about research and research questions. And clearly entrepreneurs don't get it right every time, all the time. They get it right once in a while, and that's enough to make a big difference. And so this is where I think we as academics also have to be a little bit, savvy about how we think about novel research questions or novel pathways that we might pursue. Yeah, it probably makes sense to, at least have two or three things that are related but still different directions developing.
And by the end of, let's consider now we are in the end of this research topic
Yeah.
with some novel idea and so on. How do you know that the paper is ready to submit?
That's a really tough one. My advice actually to people early in their career, whether they're doctoral students or whether they're faculty, maybe pre-tenure, is to really leverage special issues. When the special issue deadline occurs, that is when the paper is done because it has to be done at that point. And it also motivates everybody to kind of galvanize their attention around submitting for a special issue. And so I think that to me, I use that very heavily early in my career. I said, where are all the special issues related, to the topic I was working on at the time, which is kind of environmental issues and operations. And so I routinely sought them out. It didn't matter whether they were all ops journals. Most of them were because that's what I needed to publish in. But there were some other journals that were more in strategy or some other, subdisciplines in management. They had a special issue. It's vaguely related to what I had. It had the word environment in it and so on. And so it became a galvanizing force to kind of sort of say, look, I need to get a paper done for that particular thing. The other thing that I would also suggest, which is maybe slightly undervalued, is book chapters. They can, book chapters will not get you tenure. I'll be pretty clear about that. But they're still important in the sense that they allow you to get some new ideas out there. It doesn't always have to be as well developed as maybe a full paper. Some of them should be, but I mean, in principle, often there's a little bit more latitude in book chapters to try to sort of push the boundaries a bit, at least conceptually. And then that can become the basis for developing a much more, in my case, empirical paper that drives forward in one direction or another. So I might suggest, that's, and again, it's all about balance, right? So one or two book chapters in 5 years is probably plenty, but trying to think through using those opportunities to come up with some new ideas, to integrate new directions, and and hopefully that will attract the interest of the editor then who is making the call for book chapters. And so that allows me to kind of push my thinking forward, maybe work with some colleagues on some ideas as well. And so trying to think through those opportunities. So to come back to your question, it's ready when it has to be. But if there's no deadline, it does leak on and on and on potentially. And so conferences can also be a great time to sort of say, look, I need a paper. And whether it's the academy is particularly rigorous in the sense they want a full paper submitted. That's a great impetus to kind of get something done. Now, it may not be perfectly polished, to be fair, but it will be 90% of the way there. And so it really requires us maybe a few more months of work or something after the conference is over. You've maybe gotten some preliminary feedback from some of the people in the audience. And so I think that also becomes a way to make sure the paper gets done, because it doesn't matter how great your ideas are. If you don't finish the paper and get it under review, nobody else will know. And so that's not really helping you or helping the field. So.
And any particular strategy on how to deal with rejection? Because our career in the end is more about rejection than other.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. And so this is sometimes why people, kind of back off on whatever the idea was that they had in the paper and say, it's too difficult. It's just not working for me. And that's where sometimes working with colleagues can help because they say, no, we need to get this going. It's important for my tenure case, et cetera. And so I think that's where a small team of co-authors, rather than trying to do it on your own, can really help keep the momentum going. Now, some people are successful with single author papers, but I think virtually all my papers are co-authored with somebody, and having that other person to talk through some of the rejection issues and thinking and strategizing where to go next, I think is super important as you look through that too.
Okay, so it's basically strategizing with your team.
Yeah. And getting it out again quickly, because the longer it sits, the worse it's going to get. It's like, you really want to pull the Band-Aid off, let it heal, and then move on, right? And so I think trying to do that as quickly as possible is actually fairly critical with rejections. Otherwise, they like I honestly, I've had that happen too, where I've had a paper that was rejected. I thought the reviewers necessarily didn't see it my way, and then I sat on it, and then ultimately never came back to it, which is not a great outcome. And so I think it is important to keep the papers moving to get them across the finish line. Sitting on them longer won't make them better.
Okay, I have two more questions. One is about teaching.
Okay.
Considering that you are now more focused on MBA and executive MBA, and you also mentioned about artificial intelligence in research, also as a methodological tool. Do you use in your pedagogical thing too, or not?
So I'm gonna have to say I'm very early on in that. I am not the expert in how AI should or could or might be used. We are debating as a school how to use it, not only from a research, teaching, and so on perspective. I think from a teaching perspective, it's very easy to say, look, our students are using this all the time now, maybe to their detriment. At least that's what the research seems to be saying. Yet they're still using it. And so how do we adapt what we do in the classroom to this new reality? It's a difficult puzzle. My guess is it's going to take at least a few more years for us as an academy to figure out how we start to work with this better. It is shaping the way we work. So we use a lot of teaching cases at my institution, and it's shaping the way. We know the students have already run the case through AI before they get to class. So now what are you going to do is kind of the obvious answer. I think on the research side, though, AI does provide the opportunity as kind of a sounding board. Like I've used it myself to sort of say, look, I'm thinking about doing research in this space. Can you help me kind of paint the field quickly for what's been done, and so on. So it can be, the analogy I always hear is, as an early stage graduate student, kind of doing some basic survey of the field for you. You're not going to be an expert listening to AI, but it hopefully prompts some ideas, and it prompts some thinking that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise, simply because of the vast trove of knowledge out there that it's drawing on. So I think as faculty, while I'm still very early in understanding how best to use it, the possibilities are really intriguing about how one might do that. And I've also started thinking about, well, how do, let's say supply chain managers use AI, and is that changing their thinking? How could I do some structure some research questions around that as well? And so, it really opens up the teaching, the research, and particular topics within research differently than maybe we've seen in, even 5 years ago. So it's been a very fast ride. I'm not sure we all know where it's going yet, but I think in that sense, it's really been an intriguing process to work through. And I'm in my early stages. I assume most people are still at this point. So we'll all learn together, I suppose, as we go forward.
Thank you. And my last question is about the Academy of Management.
Okay, sure.
What has been your favorite Academy of Management annual meeting and why?
Okay, well, no, that would be a difficult one. I mean, the academy's been in partly, location drives some of that. Partly, you see the usual people at the academy, which is great because it allows you to catch up with some individuals that maybe you haven't seen for a full year or 2 years if they haven't been in an academy recently. So it's a great opportunity to kind of have that catch up. I was chair, back in, this is going to really date me, but I think it was 1999 for the program chair. So that's certainly memorable because it was a huge amount of work, and at that time we didn't have all the automated systems, and everything was a little more kludgy back then. But it gave me a great opportunity to kind of see the intricacies of how the academy works and how they sort of structure large conferences relative to what we see in POM. I mean, only informs that I go to would be even close to what the academy is. And so academy to me has always been about, those connections across divisions and the connections within the division, because the OM division is I think a very good size to get to know people really well. So I don't think I'd have a single, other than the one where I was program chair, conference where I say, oh yeah, that was the one I remember most, because it's always about variety. It's always about different things and seeing the same people at the same time too. So it's really been a good experience. I definitely recommend the Academy, and did so for many years for colleagues.
Okay, so for someone, I know I told you it was the last question, but this one is for someone going for the first time to the conference, what would be your advice?
So my advice would be to try to split your time between going to sessions in the OM division, which is in principle probably your primary home, and make sure you get to some of the other divisions as well, some of the presentations, some of the panels, partly because it really expands your thinking, expanded my thinking about research questions, about different connections you could have. And so whether it's in strategy, whether it's in the ONE division, because of my environmental focus, or other divisions, HR, they have a great deep division there too, and so on. So there's many different ones. So I would encourage you to at least, somebody to think about, maybe a third of their time being spent actually attending some of the other divisions, because that's truly, from my perspective, the big difference between the Academy of Management versus other OM conferences is this ability to look outside the OM field and borrow methods, borrow ideas, borrow theories, borrow, and all, and bring them into the OM space, which I think enriches our field and our research. So, get out there and meet lots of people is probably the simple punchline.
Thank you very much for your time, and I hope I can get a coffee with you during the conference. So see you in Philly.
Okay. All right. Very good. And thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you. I appreciate that.